Hello everyone, welcome back. In the last video, we created our base stats component. So in this video, we're going to cover how we can implement a stat that regenerates. As an example of a regeneratable stat, we are going to implement a stamina system using our stats system. So let's get started. So go ahead and open up the stats component. So now let's create a new function. And we'll call this function regen stamina. Okay, and now what we need to do inside this function is set current stat value, and we're going to be setting the stamina, since this is a regen function for stamina. And we're going to take the current value of stamina, and we're going to add on to that. And the amount we add is going to be the stamina regen rate. If you want, you could promote this to a variable, and you could call this stamina regen rate. And we can make this instance editable and put this in a category of stat regen. Okay, and so we want this to be set here, like this. Okay, compile and save. And just so we can test, let's go ahead and call print string. And the value that we're going to print is the current stat value for stamina. Okay, let's add a new custom event. We'll call this custom event start regen. It'll have an input of estat. And we'll call this stat type. Okay, and now we need to add a switch statement. And whenever we start regen for stamina, we can simply set timer by function name. And the function name will be regen stamina. This will be looping, and the time will be 0.1. Compile and save. Okay, let's go back to the combat player character. Okay, and add some sort of test or debug input key. And let's get the stats component and start regen. And the stat type will be stamina. The stat is regenerating. It is not going above 100. See, that is because our stamina regen rate, we need to set this to some sort of value. I'm going to set this to 2. Okay, now let's test it out. As you can see, we're going above 100, which is our max value. We don't want that, so let's go in here into the regen stamina and let's add a clamp. So we will clamp float, and the value will be this value here. The min will be 0, and the max will be get max stat value for stamina. Okay, let's test it out again. Okay, now the value no longer goes above the max. So just to test it a little bit better, let's modify current stat value. We'll set that to, let's see, -50. So that way it'll regenerate from -50 back to 100. And that works just fine. By the way, if you have another player character added to your world, you may get a bunch of different print strings, and so both functions may print for both characters. So just for testing, if you have another player character in your world that you were using to test damage and hit detection, just go ahead and delete that from your world. But there is one issue with this. And the issue is, and as you can see, once the regeneration starts, it never stops. And the reason why that's an issue is because whenever you're creating your systems, you don't want to constantly run something if you don't need to. We want to be more efficient than that. So what we're going to do is, right here, we're going to check, is current value greater than or equal to the max value? Which basically means we have finished regenerating this stat. And in that case, we can go ahead and clear timer by function name. And the function name will be regen stamina. Just go ahead and copy it, paste it here, and we can add this print string here before the branch runs. So that way the print string will still run. Okay, and let's see if that works. And that works just fine. It stopped running as soon as it reached the max value. And so you might be wondering, well, what if I just call modify current stat value without calling regen? What's going to happen? Well, as you can see, regeneration never happens. So what we're going to have to do is, let's go ahead and add a function, start regen. And the stat that we're going to start regen is for the input stat. Compile and save. Okay, now let's test it out and see if that works. As you can see, that works just fine. So anytime the stat is modified, it will automatically just regenerate the stat back. And even if you wanted to, you could add an input here. Boolean B should regenerate. And you can check, do we want to start the regeneration again? Because you may not want to always start the regeneration again in every single scenario. Should regenerate. And we can go ahead and select this. And we want the default value to be true. And there we go. And now whenever we press tab, seems like should regenerate isn't working. Even though we set the value to true by default. Let's see what the issue is. Let's go ahead and refresh nodes. Recompile. And delete this and call it again. Modify current stat value. Stamina. We'll do value minus 50. Okay, and now it's working. Whenever I uncheck this and make it false, I damage the character's health and it no longer regenerates. Okay, and so that's good. That's exactly what we need. So now we have this regeneratable stat, but we have no way or indication to know the value of this stat. So for that, let's go ahead and create a HUD and a stat bar widget so that way we can show the value to the player. So let's go to inside the combat system folder, let's just create a new folder and we'll call this UI for user interface. And inside here, we'll just go to user interface, widget blueprint. And this will be a user widget. We'll call this one WB underscore main HUD. This will be the main HUD that shows up on the player screen. We also will need another one. It's going to be widget blueprint, user widget, WB underscore stat bar. Okay, and save all. Now let's open up our stat bar. And let's go ahead and create our stat bar widget. So we're going to need a progress bar. And we can call this progress bar, you can edit the name over here and we'll call it stat bar. Okay, and for now that will be fine. Okay, and now let's go to the main HUD. And inside the main HUD, we're going to need a canvas panel. Okay, and now we need our stat bar. We need to put our stat bar in the canvas panel. You can just put this near the top left-hand corner of the screen. And this can just be our stamina stat bar. First, let's get this HUD to appear on the player's screen. So let's go to Combat System, Blueprints, open up the Combat Player Controller. If you don't have a Combat Player Controller in your project, it's easy to add one. Just right-click, Blueprint Class, select Player Controller, and just call this BP underscore Combat Player Controller. And then after that, just open up your game mode. And here in Player Controller class, just select the Combat Player Controller that you created. Open up the Combat Player Controller, and let's open up Full Blueprint Editor. The Player Controller is a good place to keep the code for the player HUD and UI elements. So that way the HUD and UI elements aren't specific to one character blueprint. So let's add a event begin play. And on event begin play, let's create widget. For owning player, let's put self, and the class will be main HUD. And the return value, we will promote this to a variable, just store the main HUD. After this, we can add to viewport. So let's go ahead and test it out and see what happens. So as you can see, whenever we play, we have our HUD on screen and we can see our stat bar. So now we need to get the actual stat bar to update. I'm going to show you a couple ways you can do this. First, I'm going to show you a way using some methods that we've already covered before, and then I'm going to show you a way with a new method. And there are a lot of methods that we can use, and each method has its own purpose that we can use for different reasons. Let's go to the stat bar, event graph, and we can use the tick event. And so what we can do is on event construct, we can get owning player pawn. And this just gets the pawn associated with this UI. From there, we can get component by class. Let's get the stats component. And let's go ahead and promote this to a variable, stats component. Now let's get our stats component, convert to a validated get. Let's go ahead and get current stat value. And the stat value that we need to get, we can just go ahead and promote that to a variable, and we'll call this stat type. We can add this to a category initialization. Go ahead and make that public and instance editable. Okay, and now we can get our stat bar. We can set percent, and the percent will be the current value divided by the max value. And we can set that as the n%. And now we can go into our main HUD and click the stamina stat bar. As you can see, the stat type enum doesn't show up. What we can do is just go back to the stat bar, and we need to make this instance editable. Okay, let's go back to the main HUD, and it should show up now. And there it is. I'm going to set this to stamina. So let's see if that works. It works just fine. However, we're constantly running this on tick when we don't really need to do that. And so that leaves us with the method that I'm going to show you now. And the method that I'm going to show you now is by using dispatchers. To sum up what an event dispatcher is, we have used event dispatchers throughout this course. An event dispatcher can be used to bind events to an event dispatcher message. You can cause all of those events to fire once the event dispatcher is called. So let's go ahead and create an event dispatcher. We'll call this onCurrentStatValueUpdated. Okay, and we'll have two inputs. And the first input will be eStats. This will be stat type. The second input will be value, and it will be of type float. Okay, compile and save. Okay, now let's go to the setCurrentStatValue function. We can call onCurrentStatValueUpdated. So this will call every time we update the current stat value. And we can get stat. This will give us the input stat value. We can get value. This will give us the input stat value. Go ahead and compile and save. And now let's go to our stat bar widget. We already have our reference to our stats component, so we have a reference to the sender. Now we just need to bind the event, so that way the event will listen for when the stats component calls that dispatcher message. We can call bind event to onStatValueUpdated. This will just allow us to bind an event that listens for the stats component to run this dispatcher message. So every time this dispatcher message is called, this event will also be called. So let's go to create event. And you can select an event here. We have no event that will work. It has to have the proper inputs. So what we can do is just create a matching event. We can call this onStatValueUpdated. Okay, let's move this over here, and we can just remove the tick function. We can just move all this over here and plug this up here. So we don't need the current here. We can just plug this in as an input, and we need to make sure that this is the correct stat value that's updating. So we can go equal enum. If the updated stat type is equal to this widget stat type, then we can continue. Now compile and save. Now let's test it out and see if this works. And as you can see, that works just fine. And so now we're not calling anything when we don't need to. And now you may be wondering, how do we change the color of this stat bar? Because right now we only have a blue stat bar. The way you can change the color of the stat bar is, let's go ahead and get some of these parameters here and promote them to variables. Go to graph. Let's get our stat bar. Let's set style. We can go ahead and promote style to a variable, and we can add this to a category appearance. And we need to get set fill, color, and opacity. Let's go ahead and promote this to a variable and call it fill, color, and opacity, and add this to appearance. And we need to make both of these instance editable. Compile and save. And now just to get some good default values, let's go ahead and go to style, and let's right click and copy style. And we can go ahead and paste the defaults into our variable. So let's right click, paste. Let's do the same thing for fill, color, and opacity. copy, and let's go to fill color and opacity and paste it here. And now let's get the event pre-construct and let's plug these in here. And event pre-construct is just called by both the game and the editor. This is a good way to update styles of widgets. Okay, and now we can go to the main HUD and select that. And since we made it instance editable, we can go ahead and modify it here. And I'm going to make this one green. I'm going to make this like a darker green. Okay, I'm going to select OK. And as you can see, that works just fine. Now let's integrate the stamina system into our combat system. So in order to do that, we need to get our stats component. We can go ahead and modify current stat value. And here on the attack event, we can add stamina. We're going to do something like -15. And for the charge attack, you can make that cost a little bit more stamina. Something like -20. For the dodge event, let's find dodge. We can run this -20 as well. And then we can go into our can perform events and add a check to see if we have enough stamina. Get current stat value. Say stamina. So we need to check is greater than or equal to, we're going to say 10. Need to add an and boolean. So that way this and this must be true before this is true. Okay, and let's add the same check to dodge. Okay, compile and save. Let's test it out. As you can see, the stamina does go down, but it keeps constantly going back up. So let's go ahead and adjust that. To adjust that, let's go to the stats component, go to event graph. Let's create a simple cooldown system for our regen. So what we can do for the cooldown system is add a retriggerable delay. And basically for a retriggerable delay, you can hover your mouse over here and see what it does. It says, calling again while it is counting down will reset the countdown to duration. And so what we're going to do is, this is going to be our cooldown time. I'm going to say this is about 1.5 seconds. And before the cooldown, we need to clear timer by function name. So we stop the regeneration, we clear the timer, and after 1.5 seconds, we start the timer again. Compile and save. Let's test that out and see how it works. Okay, so that's good. Our cooldown is working, so let's wait a few seconds, and there it goes, it starts regenerating. So that works perfectly fine. And if we don't have any stamina, we cannot attack until we get more stamina. Same for dodge. We can no longer dodge until we get more stamina. So that works just fine. And we can go ahead and delete that print string as well. We no longer need that. Delete, compile and save. Okay, and now the last thing that we're going to do in this video is add a stat bar for health. Let's go to our main HUD. And actually with the systems that we've created, it's going to be very easy to add a stat bar for HUD. So we can just copy and paste this. I'm just going to place this right here. And I'm going to make this for health. And I'm going to make this a red color. There we go. Let's compile and save, and let's see if it shows up. So it already shows up. And let's go ahead and test this out to see if it actually updates with our health. So let's go -50 for health. And as you can see, it actually updates whenever we modify our health. But now the character isn't dying whenever the health goes to 0. The reason why that is happening is because we are updating the stat value without taking damage. We only check if the character should die upon taking damage. So we can fix that by going to the combat character blueprint and binding an event to onCurrentStatValueUpdated dispatcher and checking there if the player is dead. So just select stats component, and here we can go ahead and add an event onCurrentStatValueUpdated. Okay, and once you've added that, let's just do a check. Is the updated stat equal to health? Okay, and then we'll check, is it less than or equal to 0? And if both of those are true, Then we perform death. Or actually, instead of perform death, let's get the state manager component and let's set state. We'll set the state to dead. Okay, let's go ahead and test that out and see if it works. As you can see, whenever the character's health goes to 0, the character will die. So everything is working fine now. And let's go ahead and add a comment. Just copy and paste this one over here. And instead of character state, that will be stats. Okay, and that issue is now resolved. We also have a sprinting system which does not currently use our stamina system. So let's go ahead and integrate our stamina system into our sprinting system. Okay, so now let's go ahead and create a new function, and we'll call this function sprint stamina cost. Okay, and inside this, the first thing that we need to do is we need to check, is the character actually moving? So to check that, we can get velocity, and from the velocity we can get the vector length. And this is just a way to get the character's current speed, and so we can check, is it not equal to 0? If the vector length of the character's velocity is not equal to 0, then we can continue. And what we're going to do is modify current stat value. We are going to modify the stamina, and we're going to subtract 2. And then after that, we're going to need to check, let's get the stats component, get current stat value, is the current value of stamina less than 10. If the current stat value is less than 10, then we need to disable sprinting. So let's create a function to disable sprinting. Let's create a custom event, disable sprint. And we can just move this over to disable sprint. And we can call this here disable sprint. Okay, and here we call disable sprint. And also here we need to call disable sprint. And actually we do not need to allow the character to sprint if this is not true. So we can go ahead and collapse the function and call this can perform sprint. We'll go ahead and make that pure. Let's go back here and add a condition. Can perform sprint. And there we go. Now whenever this starts, we need to set timer by function name. And the function name is going to be sprint stamina cost. So go ahead and copy it and paste it here. This is going to be looping, and the loop time is going to be 0.1. Now let's go ahead and see if that works. So whenever the character sprints, he's losing stamina. And whenever he doesn't have enough stamina, he stops sprinting. But as you can see, the stamina keeps going down whenever we walk. And whenever we stop walking, the stamina goes back up. So that's a bit of a bug that we have here. And the reason why that's happening, I'll go ahead and move this off the screen and visualize that for you. So as you can see that is running right there. And the reason why is because sprint stamina cost is constantly running. Whenever I have movement input, it's constantly running this. And so what we need to do is on disable sprint, we need to clear timer by function name. So that way this timer doesn't run whenever we don't need it to. Copy that and paste it here. Let's see if that has resolved our issue. Go ahead and sprint. And that has resolved our issue. And whenever the character runs out of stamina, he automatically stops sprinting and the stamina will start regenerating again. Okay, and with that, our stamina system is completely finished. We have implemented a stat that can regenerate, we have created a HUD system that updates a progress bar when our stat value updates, and we have implemented the stamina mechanic into our combat system. Thanks for watching. In the next video, I will show you how to have different stat costs depending on the weapon. I will also show you how to adjust damage based on the attack type.